Oh my god, this coffee from Dunkin' that I got right now, it is just not good. You ever go to I don't know if it's just a Dunkin' thing or if it happens at Starbucks or just smaller coffee shops, but I swear to God, one in 5 times I go to Dunkin' and get a coffee, I always order essentially the same shit. But every single time, or not every single time, at least 1 in 5 times, it's just bad. I don't know what it is. It's tart or I don't know. It just doesn't taste good. And this is one of those 5 times, unfortunately. So, I'm going to drink it because I'm thirsty. But I'm not definitely not going to enjoy it. Alright. So, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Bittersweet Taste. So, this is our first Thursday episode. And my plan for Thursday episodes are going to be... Obviously, they're going to be music related, but they're going to be kind of loosely related to music, or not following the same exact format every time. So, sometimes I might talk about a particular artist for a little bit. I might go into I might talk about some of my favorite albums just more in depth. I might talk about some topics related to music that aren't necessarily about the music itself. It depends. It's just kind of going to be somewhat of a variety episode, if you want to call it that. They'll probably end up being a little bit shorter, unless I'm talking about an album or something like that requires a lot of detail, but today's episode shouldn't be too long. Today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about why I started this podcast in the first place, because, like all things, some things in terms of creation need some explanation, and for probably most of you guys listening, this is kind of out of the blue. Considering I don't think I mentioned that I was going to start this before I just kind of bought this mic and then just kind of started talking into it and then posted it somewhere. So I feel like some sort of an explanation is kind of warranted in this case. Before I start, however, I want to talk a little bit about the blessing that that Kanye West gave us earlier this week. Obviously, I wasn't going to go an entire podcast without talking about it. But Kanye West if for some reason you're not following, Kanye West is obviously one of the most influential artists in the world, at least in my opinion, and one of the greatest rapper producer conglomerates. He's a really good artist. If somehow you don't know who the hell Kanye West is, and some background on his relation to me, or my interest in him, he's my favorite artist of all time. He's one of my... I wouldn't necessarily say I look up to him as a person, mind you, but as an artist and what he stands for in terms of how he approaches his art, I really love it and I really kind of connect to it. So, and obviously his albums are really amazing to me, and a lot of them hold a really deep connection into my childhood and my interest in music as a whole. But Kanye West, early this week, today, recording this on Thursday, I believe on Monday, well, okay, let me throw it back all the way to Friday. There was some news on Friday that he himself announced, surprisingly on Twitter, that he's starting a new line of clothing with The Gap. His own Yeezy brand is collaborating with The Gap with a 10-year deal or something like that, which I won't talk about in this podcast. If you're interested in that, go look it up. It was all over the news for a while. And part of that announcement, he announced a bunch of other stuff, like some documentaries on his last album, I believe, a bunch of different things that he's releasing in the near future. And one of those things was a song that was rumored to be in the works for a while. He announced that it was going to come out. He didn't say when, didn't give a date on Friday, but if you remember my past recording, I mentioned that he kind of, I guess it was Monday. So going back to Monday, he tweeted out that, again, that the song was, along with the music video, was going to be released that Monday. He didn't give a time or anything like that. And in normal Kanye fashion, he didn't hold up to his to his own announcement. For whatever reason, the joke around the community is that to never ever listen to a Kanye release date, especially if he's the one giving it, because he's always late, literally always late. So take every release an announcement with a grain of salt. I'll still talk about it if it comes up, but I don't put much weight into it. Anyway, he said it was going to come out on Monday. It didn't come out on Monday. It ended up coming out Tuesday at 10 a.m. And before this song was released, I mentioned that a minute ago that this song was rumored for a couple months back when when GQ did the spread on him in their magazine when he was originally reported to be a billionaire. It was, I can't remember who they were talking to, but someone who works closely with Kanye obviously was getting interviewed, and they talked about the song and how the song used like a lot of like industrial noises and like these weird sirens and sounded really Yeezus inspired. And I put a lot of emphasis on Yeezus inspired because Yeezus is my favorite Kanye West album. And it's my favorite album of all time. So me hearing that, I was instantly hyped up. And if you've never heard Yeezus, it's a weird, like, really electronic, really industrial, really grimy sounding album. It doesn't sound like traditional rap it doesn't sound like anything. It's completely an album of its own, and he really owned it. And it's one of the reasons why it's my favorite, because there's no album that I've heard that sounds anything like it since then, before then, at any point. And the weird thing about Kanye West is, in terms of his discography, he likes to, with every single one of his albums, he likes to hit a sound and then never touch that sound ever again. So none of his 9 albums sound the same whatsoever. They all sound completely different. So when I saw that this next song and this next album would be Yeezus inspired, or sound like it could be a Yeezus related or a Yeezus sounding piece of music, my hopes shot through the ceiling. It was insane. However, that set me up for, I was very cognizant about noticing that set me up for a lot of failure. It kind of set Kanye up for failure, because hearing something that he's going back to a Yeezus sound really put it to, it really put that Kanye was like, all right, so this album, like, this is my favorite Kanye album. If this is going to sound like Yeezus and it's bad, then I don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? It was kind of like, you love cheesesteaks, right? And then someone tells you, you've only had, cheesesteaks from like a couple places in your life, but cheesesteaks are your favorite food. And then someone tells you that, hey, this place has the best cheesesteaks ever, right? So you're like, all right, bet, I love cheesesteaks, let's go have the best cheesesteak ever. So you go to the place, you eat the cheesesteak, and you're like, this was ass. Like, this was terrible. That's how disappointed. Really weird analogy there, but that's essentially how I felt going into this song, right? So I don't want to talk about the song too much itself, because it's kind of hard to really talk about isolate without like actually like having it like on, like playing, or like having the music video up on the screen or anything like that. But if you're any bit interested and you haven't seen it or heard the song yet, go listen to it. I like it a lot. None of my friends really like it, but that's fine, because nobody really likes Yeezus anyway, and I love it. So it was essentially the response that I understood from my friends. However, the internet seemed to like it a lot, or at least the part of the internet that likes Yeezus. So if you like Yeezus, if you heard of it and you haven't heard the song yet, go check it out. It's amazing. It's really simple rapping. If you're looking for any like double entendres or any like really complex rapping styles, you're not going to find that here. As you probably won't find it with any Kanye West song from here on out. That's just not really his sound anymore. But still, the messaging was really interesting, especially coupled with the music video. There was a lot of shock value in the music video. It was a little weird. It was really dark. It's kind of not scary at times, but it was interesting. And it also features Travis Scott. Kind of. He has like half a verse. Ye kind of, he's rapping his verse, and then like halfway through, Kanye just like cuts him off for some reason. But it was fine. It was a fine verse, half a verse, if that. But yeah, definitely go check that out. And then On Wednesday, Ty Dolla $ign, if you don't know who Ty Dolla $ign is, he's an R&B artist who you definitely, if you haven't heard music from him specifically, you've definitely heard his vocals on someone's song, and you probably heard a song with him on it, because he is damn near everywhere, and I saw a joke on Twitter one day that said that people love to sprinkle his vocals on their songs like salt, even though he's not featured. So you probably heard him before. He's a really good voice. He makes really good music. He released a song on Wednesday midday with him, FKA Twigs, who is a UK, I don't even know what you would call her, but she's a really good vocalist, good performer. FKA Twigs, Skrillex, who who is a dubstep producer, originally or famously a dubstep producer, and now just produces music on the side. I think is back in his original. I think he's in like a metal band or something like that. But Skrillex, if you haven't heard of Skrillex, I don't even know if you went to middle school because that dude was everywhere. Back when dubstep was really popping off in the US, he was one of the biggest names out there. But he was on there, so FKA Twigs, Skrillex, Ty Dolla $ign, obviously, and then another producer whose name is leaving me, but I've never heard of him before. I'm not sure what his contribution was to the track. I believe I think he's a producer, so he probably just had a hand in producing the actual song itself. And then Kanye West was there, and it's like a weird house inspired, house sounding, like UK club kind of sounding song. It's really good. Kanye's verse is actually good. It's actually like a good verse, which is weird Kanye West doesn't really do good verses that much anymore in terms of content and flow and like a good rap verse. But this one was good. The Ty Dolla $ign verse is really good. His chorus is really nice. The instrumentals are really catchy. You can kind of put it on. It's definitely something straight out of a club, but it makes it really easy to listen to and really easy to just kind of bob your head to. Really good music. And then FKA Twigs has one of the greatest outros ever. I listened to the outro for the first time, and I was like, I wish this was its own song because it kind of deserves to be. It's amazing. But if you're interested in any of this artist or you want to learn more about this artist, go check that song out. It's called Ego Death, EGO and then Death, which is a weird name, but it kind of makes sense with the song. Okay, so moving off of music, I had to talk about Kanye, sorry. It's not the point of the video again, but moving off of music and onto the original topic of today's podcast, which again is why I started this in the first place. And it can kind of be, the reason I started this podcast, there are a few reasons, some of them bigger than others, but the main one being that I attribute a lot of my, I'll start with the big one. The biggest reason that I started this podcast is because I attribute a lot of the greatest parts of my life to music, especially a lot of the, not even the greatest, but the most important, some of the most critical parts of my life were really dictated by music, or not necessarily dictated by music, but music played a huge part in my mood and how I approached life and how I looked at life throughout my childhood and my high school days, especially a little bit of my middle school days. It's worth knowing that I would say I got into listening to music consistently relatively late, a lot later than I think a lot of people get into listening to music, which is really interesting considering how much stock I put into the music I listen to now. But for one reason or another, I would say that I got into music around middle school, which, again, might be a little bit later than other people. I have this perception that that's a little bit late for getting into music, but for one reason or another, that's when I got into it. And especially in high school, obviously, it's high school. Things happen in high school. Some of you guys listening probably knew me in high school, could probably know maybe some things that I could be referring to in this case, but for the most part, or simply put, music kind of helped me get through some stuff that happened there, good and bad, especially. Some of the best part, like I said before, some of the best parts of my life, music was played a huge part in it. Not even just like music, listening to it, but if you didn't know, I was in band in high school, all 4 years, and also in middle school. But I played alto saxophone, and a lot of my core friend group were band kids, and just from that aspect alone, it's, music's been, in terms of like my interpersonal relationships, music held a big part there, even though I wasn't really in band necessarily because I loved playing an instrument. It was because I loved the people that I was around while I just happened to be playing an instrument, if that makes sense. But but me being in band relates very heavily back to the biggest reason I started this podcast, which is because since I owe so much I would consider that I owe so much of my life to music, I wanted to give back to it in some way. I don't think I'm talented enough to. I definitely cannot sing. No matter how much I sing to myself and to my friends, just randomly, I cannot sing to save my life. I can't rap. I don't produce. I don't. Again, I haven't picked up my saxophone in years and years, but I still felt like music has been such a huge part of my life. I felt the need and the obligation to give back to it anywhere that I can, and one way that I do that is by just talking about it. I'll talk about music to literally anybody who brings it up in the slightest instance. And if you follow me on Twitter, if you follow my personal Twitter, a lot of my Twitter content kind of revolves around music, which, if you're not into music, I can understand how that could be very, very annoying because it's basically my personality, my Twitter personality at this point. And especially if you don't follow the artists that I follow, or if you're not interested in following the artists I follow, it can just be noise. So, and that's not necessarily why I want my social media to exist, even though a lot of my social media presence has been based around music for the past couple years. I don't necessarily want it to be the main focus of it. So I wanted to take this focus of music onto a different medium, hence a podcast. And so that's the big reason, again, is my contribution. Just in summaries, this is my contribution back to a community and a following and an art form that has really done a lot for my life and who I am now, who I am today. So yeah, that's the big one. The second reason is because I recently, I believe last year, I started listening to podcasts, which podcasts in general are a growing medium in terms of like consumption, just like media consumption. It's a little different obviously it's a little bit different from movies, from TV shows, from just listening to music, from interviews, from anything. But I think podcast is a really interesting medium because there's so many ways you can approach it. There's so many things you can do to it. And with Spotify especially, having easy access for literally anybody to set up a podcasting account or to implement podcasts into accounts that they already have, it just kind of seemed like, this is something that anybody can do to any extent. And in what I've done so far, I've really had a lot of fun doing this. Just, talking to a mic to anybody who will listen. So I figured, well, this is a growing medium. This is a thing that people are starting to do more now. And I can jump on this wave. I can see how, me listening to the podcast that I listen to, I can see how much fun people have just talking about whatever they want to talk about. And I think that's very, not necessarily underrated in today in terms of how people approach their voices and like how they really choose to represent themselves. Because at the end of the day, a lot of social media is just that. It's just represent, how do you take who you are as a person and put that out there for other people to see. And I think this is probably one of the more productive ways of doing that. It's not really restricted, or I'm not really restricted to a character limit, to a content limit for the most part, and even necessarily to an audience limit. Like you guys listening are my audience. You guys have a very conscious choice to listen to this or to not listen to this. You guys can easily, you guys can still know me as a person, can still follow me as a person, and still choose whether to follow me on this platform, which I think is a little bit different than a lot of social media, because I'm not sure about you guys listening, but a lot of the people that I follow on social media, and I think that follow me back, are really people I know for the most part, or people that I, in terms of Twitter, look up to. So I follow a lot of the musicians I follow, but for the vast majority of people that I follow on social media are people that I have a personal connection with. So I feel kind of obligated to follow them on these platforms, despite not necessarily subscribing to the opinions or the personas that they put on those platforms. So that makes sense. Which again is why I split a lot of my musical focus off of my social media and onto this podcast for that sole reason. And I think that's more productive, and I think it's more beneficial for the people that know me in real life. Yeah. So there's my second reason. Another big one is, and I already had I think I title my, for the most part, I title my videos, or my podcasts before I record them, just because I kind of, in the planning stage of what I want to talk about, as I'm planning them, I kind of think of a funny or kind of an offhand title as I'm thinking through what I'm going to talk about. So if you're reading you saw the title of the podcast. But another reason that I wanted to do this instead of tweeting it out, or rather expressing my opinions on music through this instead of on Twitter, is because I absolutely I like to joke around that I love the sound of my own voice, which in essence is true. I can talk to anyone who will listen for hours, and instead of me actually going and doing that, you guys listening have a very conscious option to just stop listening to me at any point. If you get tired, you can just stop listening. If you like what I'm saying, you can keep listening. But it kind of, it keeps my own kind of self-indulgence into my own opinion on these things. It keeps it in check, and it makes sure that I don't want to say overwhelm people, but really, I'm not being obnoxious about my opinion, or rather, I'm allowed to be obnoxious on my opinion, because, you guys can stop me without me knowing, in comparison to, me talking to someone in person about music, and I'm just rambling on and on and on, and then they're just kind of awkwardly just sitting there listening, and they kind of wanted to spend the last 10 minutes just wanting to escape the conversation in general and leave. In this way, you can just kind of do that and allow me, if you want to hear me ramble on about stuff, you can easily just completely do that. But yeah, so I think those, for the most part, that in short is why I started this podcast, and why I think I'm going to continue doing it is, this is not necessarily something that I think will ever grow. If it grows, then obviously that's amazing, and I would like it to grow, or I should say, I would love this kind of platform to grow. I would love for my audience to grow, but at the same time, that's not necessarily why I'm actually doing it. I just like the idea of me talking into a mic about things I want to talk about, and if people listen, people listen. If people don't listen, people don't listen. It's really just kind of that simple. But more or less, I'm doing this for my own enjoyment at this point. And again, if people like hearing it, then I absolutely love it. And I've gotten some really good. I've talked to some of my friends from college. I've talked to my girlfriend about this. I've talked to some other, a bunch of different people about the episodes that I've done so far, and how it can be better. And I've gotten some really good feedback, and some of the things that people have said to me have really made me feel a way, because it's just like one of my good friends, I'll shout him out. Hopefully he doesn't mind his name being said, but my good friend my really awesome friend Brad from Penn State, he texted me after my first episode about my favorite albums of the year so far, and he told me that one of the artists I talked about, Tiana Taylor, he went and listened to her her album that I talked about, not necessarily the one that would have on my list, but a past one, the one that she worked on with Kanye. And he said that he really liked her, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he said that he was looking forward to looking into her other works, and then obviously off of my recommendation, and that things like that, even if that could be a relatively isolated incident, or not incident, a relatively isolated occurrence. That's one thing that I always wanted to do with sharing my musical opinion in the first place, was just kind of, I don't know. I like some good music, I like some bad music, but I like music that I like, and if I can show people music that they like, then that means the world to me, and that is why that's why I'm just talking. That's why I'm doing this. So yeah, again, this was a very short that was kind of, again, all I really wanted to talk about this podcast. Hopefully this gives you guys a little bit of insight onto why, about my reasoning for starting it, and my reasoning going forward, and why I'm doing it in the first place. Because I feel like while podcasting is an art to some extent, just to say that I feel like you can really connect with an artist, not calling myself an artist in this sense, but you can really connect with an artist if you understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, and you can kind of go along with their message. And I think it's very important maybe not important, but it's very nice to hear artists give their reasoning for why they do their art. And especially in music, that's very apparent in the art itself. Again, there's obviously a lot of messaging in music, so they kind of put that out there in the first place, or very obviously. But for some people, it's not that obvious, and I think it makes it harder for them to connect to. I think it makes it harder for listeners, for observers, for fans of the art to really get a deeper connection with the art itself if they can't really identify the artist's purpose in doing it. So I feel like this is pretty important to kind of address at the very beginning of this. Again, I think I'm going to be doing this for a long time, to whatever extent it goes to. But yeah. So again, that's going to be it for today's podcast. Look forward to, I will say, the albums I'm looking forward to, this, going back to strictly music, there are a couple albums I'm looking forward to coming out tomorrow, I believe. There is a Pop Smoke posthumous album coming out, which I'll say I'm not the biggest fan of posthumous albums. I'll talk more about it on Monday. But I'm looking forward to that. I believe that's the only project I am looking out for. I believe that's the only album I'm looking out for specifically. Again, I explained what my mentality is going towards new music every week. So I'll be jumping into that project. Probably, I will be out of town this weekend, so I probably won't be able to listen to much music, at least to the capacity I want to. So probably Sunday I'll hope to give that album a good listen, along with any other surprise ones that come out, and then along with any surprise singles that I find interesting. And of course, tune in on Tuesday for my thoughts on those. And then quickly before I leave here, I actually do want to mention that two very amazing songstresses, R&B artists, one being Snow Allegra and the other one being Summer Walker, both announced that they are releasing EPs on next Friday, so Friday the 10th, July 10th, and I am insanely excited for those. So this weekend essentially is a bridge to those albums. So we'll probably get into this weekend. I'll get into like my hip hop bag a little bit with this Pop Smoke, and then we'll just jump right back into R&B the next one. But yeah, thank you guys for listening, and I will see you on Monday.